Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the 9 to 5 podcast with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And it's our traditional Thursday catch-up of news across the region. And Joel, I know you've got one lined up and ready to go. That's one of our most delightful 905 MPPs.
Well, if you live in the region, you would have seen it in the news, seen the headlines, but our illustrious young MPP for the region, Niagara West MPP Sam Oosterhoff, is in the news again. This time, he's a headliner in a online Zoom chat or Zoom event discussing abortion in politics for young people. It's head off by a university group, the University of Ottawa Students for Life, it appears. And it's held by them, the Carleton Pro-Life Network, and the University of Waterloo Students for Life. Oh, my alma mater. That in itself is not the bad news. I mean, an NPP is entitled to have views opposing abortion. That's not the issue. The issue is the organizers of this event have a habit of calling abortions equal to the Holocaust. That kind of hyperbole is astounding in the modern day. I think to compare anything to the Holocaust is, I mean, the Holocaust is kind of like it's horrible. It's horrible for a reason. We compare things to the Holocaust for a reason. And it shouldn't just be used flippantly. It was a horrible act of inhumanity on humanity. And, it's just, you kind of have to shake your head and say, I want to side myself with these people. I mean, come on.
And I think this is a youth group of some, or a group focused on the younger people. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it looks to me like they are campus clubs. Every university has a network of campus clubs. They're typically there to enrich student life on campus. They're clubs that are organized generally by people who have like-minded interests. These are clearly pro-life students who have organized these clubs, and that is perfectly fine and I think acceptable for them to do so. But you cross the line by saying, "Oh, getting an abortion is the equivalent of the Holocaust." It's not.
It speaks to worrying level of ignorance, or you fear that there's a growing level of ignorance amongst not even the younger generation, but some younger adults. That using making that kind of comparison is just it's just pathetic and disgusting. And it speaks to an ignorance of what the Holocaust was and just how the level of atrocity there.
Well, I look at it as they're going for shock value. Clearly, they want to stir up controversy just for the sake of adding controversy, which is, I guess, a sign of the times, right? You want to make a splash for yourself, and you want to make a name for yourself. Oh, let's say something outrageous. So let's compare getting an abortion to the Holocaust, which what's astounding is that it's a university. These are campus organizations. You would think they would have hopefully one or two history students in their club in the club registers, because I remember going to university, and one of the classes I took was the history of the Holocaust by a professor who, that's what he did. He studied the Holocaust, like how did it happen? What were the factors leading up to it? How could something that horrific unfolded in modern times? And you think somebody on campus said, guys, it's one line too, or one note too far. This doesn't make sense, and it's offensive to to Jewish people. It's offensive to Holocaust survivors who are still alive. It's offensive, and you know what? I'm going to shame on MPP Oosterhoff for going there. Because you're adding credibility to this argument that it's a fair comparison. I understand he has pro-life views, but you know what? I chalk it up to his youthful ambition. And I applaud him for being youthful and passionate. But it shows his ignorance of the topic, his lack of education on the topic, and his lack of humility on the topic.
Well, and I'll be slightly less charitable to him on the issue of a woman's right to choose. He is a young man, from a particular background that does not respect women. I believe a fairly extreme religious background, and that was the community that got him a nomination and got him elected, despite the fact he was spectacularly inexperienced and not totally qualified, and has made a habit ever since of saying unfortunate things and doing unfortunate things, like having family gatherings of 40 people without any masks in the middle of a pandemic. And because of...
Well, on that note, I want to just emphasize that was at a restaurant. That was at a restaurant, a private business that actually asked them to follow health guidelines. The business wasn't trying to get in trouble. The business was trying to accommodate as best they can, and they flat out broke the rules. And that's that. It's becoming very much apparent that Mr. Oosterhoff is out of his depth, out of his element when it comes to provincial politics. I mean, this is a man who is the parliamentary secretary for education, the minister of education, yet has never stepped foot.
Farce.
Well, he's never stepped foot in an Ontario public school. Here he is going to a university campus student club event, and he himself has never stepped foot in an Ontario university classroom. He's never been to it. He's not enrolled. He has no degree. He's not working on any degree. He literally just got handed this plum job because you're right. This community put him in the office, it says something about Niagara West. I'll be honest. I mean, if you can elect this guy, I'll say it. You must have a low opinion of your elected officials, and you must just not care about who governs you. Because this clown says something about you right now. His actions say something about you, and you have to ask what that is.
Well, it says something about the Progressive Conservative Party leadership, and Doug, big strong man Doug, that he has repeatedly refused to do more than make a few gentle comments about, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. Ford has condemned the group's comment about the Holocaust, but he hasn't condemned his MPP for associating with that group. Same when the incident happened at the hotel. There were previous things that Oosterhoff has said that have been pretty unfortunate. I mean, making a statement outside Queen's Park that abortion would be illegal in our lifetime or illegal in a generation or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, sure, you're entitled to your point of view, but you're representing the province, and I think you're entitled to your point of view, but you're not entitled to have that view treated with a whole lot of respect when it's one as offensive and misogynist as the so-called pro-life. We've had this week the Catholic Church in Ontario stating that. Basically discouraging Catholics from taking certain vaccines because of what happened in the development of certain vaccines 50 years ago. Basically, one or two abortions used in scientific processes decades and decades and decades ago is still a reason to say to people, don't take this vaccine, which is so irresponsible. So, it's been, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said 100 times before. In most vaccines, and I think the same goes for the flu jabs and many vaccines that have used the traditional sort, not the new kind. During their development, they have to use human cells, but these were generated and are not don't come from humans anymore. They are just simply created in the lab. So this is discouraging people from doing something that will protect their health, at the same time as, on the other hand, saying we have to protect people who aren't, this sanctification of one stage of life when apparently you don't really seem to care very much about another stage of life. And it always seems like the moment you're born, they stop caring. So I have very little patience for it. And I know it's
I just looked up the story you're talking about. The National Post was just coming up here saying that the Catholic conference, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, has clarified their stance, saying that they would allow Catholics to get whatever vaccine was offered to them. But yeah, there's a question of how the vaccines were developed, based on general assumptions. It's this backwardness of just going, just trying to find it frustrates me that you have this small group trying to dictate how the rest of us live. I mean, I'm not. I always thought that the topic of abortion is a complicated one. Clearly, I don't really want to weigh in on it in terms of my stance on it, mostly because I myself am never going to have one. I'm never going to be in that position that I would have to make that choice, and I don't feel that it's my place to condemn or judge anyone based on that. I can respect that somebody else might have strong viewpoints on it, but here's the thing: is if you're going, I think it undermines your viewpoint if you're going to go for the shock value of comparing the getting an abortion to the Holocaust. It undermines your point immediately. Like to me, it just says we're not talking fairly, or this is not an apples to apples comparison. They're two very different events. They're two very different circumstances, and you're just going for shock value because you don't want to debate the topic on the merits of your argument versus the merits of mine. Any seasoned MPP would have looked at this and said, "I'm not going to this." You may or may not have the same viewpoint. You may be pro-life, but any seasoned MPP would say, "No, I'm not stepping foot in this room. I'm not clicking join on this Zoom call because this is going to undermine my argument," which goes to kind of the maturity of Sam Oosterhoff. That it's this. If you think about it, the guy just literally just graduated from homeschool and got a 6-figure job where he gets to make decisions that the rest of us have to live with. I mean, does this sound like a good idea? Like, this kid has no life experience. He has no idea what you, Roland, or I, Joel, am going through, or what any of you listening at home are going through. He doesn't have a family to raise. He doesn't have to risk losing his job due to COVID. He doesn't have to worry about any of the stuff that we're going through. He just doesn't have that life experience. He can't sympathize with us on that level, or try to empathize, I should say, to say, okay, I can put myself in your shoes, which is why you get stuff like this. It's a sad state of affairs. I agree. Like, Doug Ford should be, he should at the very least remove him from his parliamentary secretary job, just to save him from future grief.
Yeah, and we all know that most MPPs, they'll find some kind of job for you that means you're not just a backbencher. But there are some who don't even rise to those heady heights. I don't understand why this young man in his first term in office would be particularly warranting any kind of position anyway. I wouldn't. The youth is not the issue. We've spoken a lot about young people and getting young people elected recently. Youth is not the issue if you've got some kind of open mind and willingness to question your own assumptions. And now, I've just been stating something with great confidence that happens to be my, but I am willing to speak to anybody to hear other points of view. I don't think Mr. Oosterhoff ever has done. I doubt very much that he's ever gone to speak to women who have been, not that they'd want to speak to him, but women who are the victims of sexual assault or rape. I'm fairly sure that his particular pro-life attitude is pro-life in all circumstances. If I'm wrong, then correct me, but I doubt it. People who have been raped will be forced to have the child of their rapist. The people living in extreme poverty, women living in circumstances that in which having a child does make a terrible situation 100 times worse. I don't think he's ever had those conversations to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should speak to people who are actually living at the cutting edge, because I'm never going to be, like you just said, I'm never going to be in that situation. I'm never going to be a young, poor, pregnant woman who's in need of that help. I'm never going to have to deal with issues like what happens when you make abortion illegal and the backstreet abortions and the people who die because of that. The people who are dying right now in the US because abortion has been so constrained in some states. If you want to talk about people dying in miserable circumstances, people who are basically murdering and dying needlessly, I can go point at real people and not make pathetic comparisons to the Holocaust while I'm doing it. So it's, if he would just have some conversations or suggest some kind of open-mindedness, I'd have a little bit more sympathy for him. But everything I've seen from him suggests he's very confident that everything he thinks is already right and he doesn't need to hear from anybody. And that's the problem with the PC party up and down, it seems to me. Well, there's a different aspect of public health. There's a couple of articles, one from the Spectator, Hamilton Spectator, and one from the Peel Pointer, or the Pointer, which covers Peel and Mississauga, and to do with the shortcomings and some of the ways in which vaccines are being delivered to people who are from diverse backgrounds, non-white, indigenous people, and we're seeing these discrepancies in kind of the rates at which vaccines are being distributed. So certainly in Peel, which everybody knows has been the real kind of red hot furnace of COVID in Ontario, Peel has been excluded from various trials and is not doing as well with receiving supplies of vaccine as certain other areas where it seems like that they would be right at the top of the list. So we're actually already seeing, and the Pointer make a good point, as they would do, that we're in effect in Peel heading into a third wave. The 7-day average has it dipped down at the start of March to a low point, and since then it has been going up from about 130, 140 cases back up over 100 the last few days. So you really feel that at the best end of the spectrum that there's a certain tone deafness coming from the province, or failure to think about focusing on areas that have the greatest need. And the other end, just the traditional inability to treat different communities with the attention they deserve.
I remember I was online on Twitter, and I saw an interesting thread that, like, right now our vaccine distribution plan from the province is, let's get every old person who can barely send an email to sign up onto an online portal to fight for a time slot to go in to a clinic and get their COVID shot. Surprise, surprise, it's run into issues and hiccups. I've seen an argument made that our approach to handling this pandemic shouldn't be based on age groups or age demographics. It should be based on our postal code, because we know where the higher numbers of COVID are. We know that they are in, and again, nobody's going to be surprised when I say this, a lot of racialized communities, poor economic communities. We're seeing higher instances of COVID, most because the parents in those households aren't able to isolate, work from home. They are the frontline workers, or they're the ones who are working in places like the Amazon warehouse that had to be shut down because they had 640 some odd cases of COVID. The argument was made that if we go in and start vaccinating there, we can start nipping the numbers where they start. We can go and target those places. I mean, of course, we should have done the long-term care homes to start. Absolutely. But rather than this tripping over ourselves to get grandma and grandpa vaccinated, because I don't think it has been working very well. From what I've been reading in the various news publications, it's hard to get people who are not familiar with using internet to order stuff to all of a sudden now sign up for your COVID shot. And it is, also the fact that the login site crashed the first day that it went online. This doesn't bode well for a COVID vaccine rollout. And, we ought to be focusing on, going where the disease is. Now, part of that is maybe we don't really know well because our testing was so poor at the beginning. Who knows?
Well, like everything, it seems like there were supply issues. Obviously, we all know that there were supply issues, but I think the supply issues have been solved. And it still seems that we are it's a disorganized rollout. It seems to me with every region taking its own approach, with the province and the provinces across Canada, as far as I can see, being very reluctant to pick a route and go with it. I mean, like you say, do something organized. I mean, if governments want us to call, if governments want us to receive a letter, they're pretty good at getting those letters to us. Like tax returns or whatever. I find it strange that in this day and age we put all the burden on people to just fight it out on a phone line. And I know some people seem to get through pretty quickly and have got their appointment. But I've also heard of people who just spending days on the phone line trying to get someone to pick up. Why? And I mean, I I'm just comparing this with my family in the UK, where my brother and sister have both had their first shots, and they're only a little bit older than me. I mean, they've had a longer run up, and so to an extent, it's an unfair comparison, but it just seems like chaotic. And when you're dealing with, say, the Indigenous community, where there's a certain amount of cultural resistance and distrust of vaccinations and things like this,
and rightfully
when
so.
You're then not. Yeah, and we get why that is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like any, I was thinking of Doug Ford calling out the one MPP from Northern Ontario who is Indigenous, who was invited by, I believe it was the reserve or the band, to come and get a shot to show leadership and say, it is okay. You're not, it's okay to get your shot. It's safe. It is effective. I'm getting it. I'm going to be a community leader. And to say, oh, you're skipping the line, you get back. It's like, how incredibly insensitive and just tone deaf to history do you have to be to make that call? Which actually sparked me to look a little bit into what the history is. And it's amazing that there is no actual, I mean, the federal government, from what I understand, is flying or going to the reserves to vaccinate First Nations peoples. Great, wonderful. However, there's a huge chunk of Indigenous people who don't live on reserves. They live in our cities, and in the cities in the 905. I found this out, and this shocked me. It's just a statistic: 2% of Hamilton's population is First Nations. That Hamilton is not a small city, and 2% of that population is not small potatoes. It's a huge chunk, and they're sitting there wondering where's our lineup? Where do we go to get our shots? And nobody has an answer. This is an issue. It's a big problem for our vaccine rollout. I mean, you can't just allow 2% of a city's population to just fall under the radar because nobody sat down to come up with a plan.
Yeah, and the Spectator mentions a number of Indigenous people who received their first shot, and then there was a change of direction, and they've been told they're going to have to wait 4 months to get the second shot. Now, you can say, well, they've had one, so it's better than nothing, but it's like, these are people, again, the nature of things being that people from an Indigenous background often have a higher percentage of health challenges and other challenges relating to poverty and all manner of problems that to have a kind of change of direction thrown at them in that way seems very peculiar. And like you say, I mean, the story with Doug Ford and apologies if my pronunciation is bad. It's Sol Mamakwa, who is the MPP for
That's right.
Winong, and we really need to get better at this stuff about how we pronounce things. Doing something that was really important, which is going up to his community or going into a First Nations community and trying to counter that distrust that we just spoke about by getting a vaccination at their invitation. And you get this thrown back in your face by the Premier. I
think it's also to be pointed out to our listeners, for those who aren't aware of the history, our government would go to First Nations reserves back in the day and test drugs and vaccines on the people who live there. When our government wanted to clear out a particular territory of First Nations and Indigenous people who called that area home for many, many generations, they were giving gifts of blankets laced with smallpox. Like this is, if you want to talk about a community that is distrustful of government saying, "Hey, come and get this shot," this is it, folks. I mean, forget if there's one community that I think has a valid history of concern here, it's our First Nations people here in Canada. This isn't some crackpot, the 5G, the Bill Gates 5G network chip is going to be in the vaccine. No, this is people who legitimately say when the government comes asking to jab you in the arm, bad stuff has happened to us. So
yeah, I mean, literally under the guise of healthcare. Yeah, I mean that is a really, really important point. We're used to the men in white coats being a good sign,
right,
not
right.
a bad sign. Whereas it's literally been the agents of oppression and even genocide coming under the guise of healthcare and looking after you. I mean it's again. I mean, like you said earlier, a little bit of history goes an awful long way to breaking down some of these barriers, because I'm pretty sure Mr. Ford is fairly ignorant of all of that.
Well, I mean, I look at like here in the 905, as I said earlier, 2% of Hamilton's population are Indigenous. That it's not a small population. It's not a population that you can overlook or say, okay, well, the herd immunity is going to capture that and protect them. It's not. It is if you think about it, and the vaccine defense strategy, it's the weak link. If you're going to overlook it, if you're not going to go in there and say, okay, let's figure out a way to get this community vaccinated and taken care of, we could be, possibly looking at a fourth way. Like we got to be smarter than this. We can't do this kind of. What boggles my mind about it is that we're acting like we're making this up on the fly, and we've literally had a year. We've had COVID for 1 year. We are coming up. We have passed the 1 year anniversary of a state of emergency being declared for this pandemic. Why at the federal and provincial level was not immediately, let's get a vaccine task force. Yes, a vaccine might be 3 years away at that point. It might be 5 years. It might be never. But why wouldn't you get somebody together and say, let's get a plan in place. Forget the supply part. We got that figured out. Okay, that's clumsy enough, but we got that. How do we get the vaccine to people? Okay, and what's the plan for once we get it to get into people's arms? And I understand the Pfizer vaccine has to be stored like, minus 70 or minus 100. It has to be frozen the entire time. I get that. And once you thaw it out, immediately it has to be jabbed in the arm or else it goes bad. Okay, fine. That's a detail that you can figure out rudimentary. It strikes me like nobody thought of it, come up with a plan. Nobody sat down in a room and said, hey, how do we do this? Do we just tell people to go to a hospital? Do we just set up a warehouse to jab people in the arm? Do we just tell everyone to go to your family health clinic? Like, what do we do? It strikes me as I don't think anybody in the Ministry of Health actually thought this out or sat down and said, what are the barriers? Do we need to put money into this? Do we need to buy? I was thinking like MASH, the TV show MASH. Like that's what my head was thinking. It's like, oh, we'll set up these pop-up tents, MASH tents around the province in Toronto and Peel and Halton and Oshawa and Newmarket and Niagara, and we'll set these pop-up field hospitals, and we'll just tell people, okay, Roland Tanner, guess what? Your vaccine shot is Monday at 11 a.m. Go, take this letter or take this email, print it off, and show up with your health card, and we'll jab you in the arm with the COVID vaccine. That's what I assumed was going to happen. Clearly, that didn't happen. I have the feeling we're still figuring this out, and we're still tripping over our shoelaces to get vaccines in the arm. And that's where, to kind of bring it back to our First Nations, they're getting overlooked. I literally think that somebody said, "Oh, they're saying we didn't think about that." We didn't consider that. We thought the feds were going to figure that out. We didn't think native people lived in cities.
Well, so I mean, just to come back to the story about Peel, and obviously their obvious need to address the problems that they've had because of the nature of the workforce in Peel. And what they were excluded from is the Astra Zeneca vaccine, which is technically still in trial in Canada. We have 500,000 doses that have arrived, so people can start being vaccinated with that under the terms of it being a trial in Canada. Peel has been completely excluded, but not Hamilton, not Toronto, not Guelph, not Peter, Simcoe, Muskoka. So why is Peel not getting any? I mean, like, there's some of those areas are very clearly not areas.
Peel should have been a top priority.
Concern.
Like Brampton and Mississauga should have been just any excuse to get a vaccine in the arms of people there. Clearly, like, it's astounding. Again, it's just I'm astounded at just how we're tripping over our feet to get this vaccine out there. I don't think it's malicious. It's just nobody's sitting down and looking at this objectively. It's just we're now in a third wave of COVID. Maybe the third time's the charm. This time we'll figure it out, people. I doubt it. But I get the feeling that we're like the government's just going to forget about, the code, their color chart, we're color code fuchsia, COVID preparedness, awareness, whatever it is. They're going to try and get vaccines out the door, and rightfully so, but it's just going to be this chaotic mess of a situation for the next few months is what I'm predicting. I hope I'm wrong, but the last year hasn't shown me anything otherwise.
Well, it seemed like really somebody's job on March the 13th, 2000, to start planning for rolling out the vaccine and to do nothing else until the vaccine arrived. So that when it arrived, there could be an orderly, systematic, and logical. No, everybody, just jump on the phone and we'll work it out. Fine, we're doing it by age. There is a logic to that. I mean, there's a logic, but there's also a logic to like you say, I think definitely a logic for going after hotspots. It seems to be too much to ask, and it's infuriating. What were people doing for all those months? I know a lot of people are working extremely hard through this, and maybe it's unfair, but it does seem like some other places in the world, one of which, not just because of supply, are doing this better. We've addressed the supply issues. Frankly, we never ran out of the vaccine anyway, even while the supply was an issue, because it wasn't getting put into people that quickly. It'll be good when this is over, because it's just highlighted the huge weaknesses in our provincial government operations. And I think we really need to think again about how we deal with this kind of scale of crisis in the future, so that this piecemeal, half-assed approach is not what happens. Because I mean, this pandemic could have been a lot worse. This was a relatively mild pandemic, as pandemics go. Horrendous and awful, and it's going to take a toll that we're going to be paying for the rest of our lives in a lot of ways. But you can speak to doctors. This could have been worse. When they talk about the big one coming, the kind of 1918. It could have been more infectious. It could have had a higher rate of mortality, and yet we were struggling to cope at every single step of the way, to just do the most basic things of protecting. And it's disappointing to say the least. Anyway, I think that probably wraps it up for this Thursday's episode, and we'll be back next week with I think we've got a really good interview lined up for next week. So we're looking forward to that one. Bye for now.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.